two, three.
I tell every guest this, and I mean it in every case. I'm really excited for this conversation. I've had this circled on my calendar now for a few weeks, Alim. Your background, your experiences, the diverse things that you've seen in a number of different industries. I'm just super excited to dig into all that. Before we do, thank you for joining us. A bit about your background and experiences and what led you to today.
Well, thank you for having me. I've listened to many of your other podcasts. I feel very privileged to be invited to your table. More about me. So, if I start on the personal side, I'm married. My husband and I have two wonderful kids, a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old. They keep us very busy. Recently relocated from Toronto to New York City. This is our second tour in New York, and loving it so far. Professionally, I've been very fortunate to have some great tours of duty in HR, in finance, M&A, sales, and all across some very leading brands. So lots of learning opportunity. By design, it's been a very international career, and in total, I think we're at 6 relocations internationally. I obviously have a very patient and supportive spouse,
Yes, you
so
do.
that makes it happen a little bit easier.
It's a fantastic story, and a fantastic story on a number of fronts. I mean, touching on your last point, having a supportive spouse is the difference between professional success and individuals that get burnt out and have a hard time enduring the pressures of the roles. And you talked about your background in very polite and humble ways. You've worked for a number of iconic brands in very high profile roles, and that comes with pressure, and that comes with a tax to the family and to the personal life. And obviously, you guys have done a great job managing your relationship, raising children. Not easy in today's world and today's realities. If it's okay with you, I want to double click though on a previous experience. One of the things that stood out for me when I was going through and doing some research for the show was your time as the senior vice president of global talent at Adidas based in Germany. You co-led the people and culture segment of the company's 5-year strategic design, including the holistic review of the company value chain and operating model to improve customer centricity, speed to market, reduce complexity, activities that traditional HR people aren't involved in terms of conversations. And yet, here you are at the boardroom table being part of a strategic reimagining of an iconic brand. I'd just love to maybe get a window into what was life like for you in those moments, and how did you navigate what was undoubtedly a pressure cooker of a time?
Yeah, there was a lot going on, and Adidas had an extraordinary run over the last 4 years, 5 years, with Casper Rorsted as the CEO.
Mhm.
And it was 6 months into my role there, and I was asked to be part of a small cross-functional team of 20 senior leaders that sponsored by Casper. And I was new enough to ask a lot of questions because I was relatively new to consumer goods, and so I sort of used that license of being new to be really inquisitive and poke at things, and I think that served me quite well because you get to challenge the status quo. But I started with a fact base, and I approach this in the way that I normally approach any other assignment, is start with understanding what the macro view is. What are the demographic changes, social trends, labor economics, also employee preferences that are changing. And that was really to understand the external forces and what I would call the discontinuities. And the purpose of this group coming together, by the way, was to chart out the next 5-year strategy for Adidas. So, not a small task, and a lot of this was riding on how are we going to compete and be effective and successful in the next 5 years. Second, I firmly believe that to have impact as an HR leader, you need to have an intimate understanding of the value creation process, and really understand the various levers you have to stimulate behaviors in the organization. And then only then can you really engage in developing optimal HR solutions. And that includes the operating model, understanding the capabilities, where your core competence is, and also thinking about resourcing strategies. Um, Even just within the last 3 years, with the way future of work has shifted and borders have collapsed with remote work, the gig economy has having a tremendous impact on how you think about resourcing. Now, I
Mhm.
didn't know about all that 3 years ago. But when you start going through scenario planning, which I'm a huge fan of, you can start to think about all the different permeations of how external forces can have an impact internally, and then you're ready for that so that you're not surprised if these changes percolate. And finally, I'm all about simplicity and a big fan of design thinking um, versus best practices. You know, sometimes people like to go to external thought leaders, or they look at the organizations in the past. You look at GE for the way they did the 9 box, and you take that best practice and you try to put in your organization. I'm not a big fan of that because I think that that implies that you have the same culture, you have the same maturation of the business, et cetera. I like to start with where are we at with the organization? What is the culture? Where do we need to get to? You might be inspired by some of those best practices, but I'm a strong believer that you have to create and be simple about what is right for your culture and not have it too over engineered. And then the cross-functional collaboration, I think, is just fundamental. It's table stakes. And I was fortunate because the 20 of us that were on this team were literally from all across disciplines in the company. I was the only HR person there, but there was someone from supply chain, someone from marketing, someone from sales, so on and so forth. And it was great to just design together, and we would present. So I sat in on the presentations for product development or supply chain, but I was invited, and there was the psychological safety in the room to challenge things. Just
Mhm.
as I was presenting operating model or HR programs, they would challenge me. And in the end, I think you end up with a much more cohesive strategy. You understand the interdependencies, and I think it stimulates diversity of thought. And finally, it's not just HR led; it's business led. So you have real pragmatic solutions that have more efficacy when they're executed.
And that are translatable across function. Because
Yes.
when we argue from our own vantage point, we alienate other people, whether you're a CFO or CHRO. And I think there's a lot of richness in your answer. And I'm going to try and unpack it as we kind of move the conversation forward. But I love the depth of the answer because I think it speaks to the fundamental challenges in human performance in organizations. And it starts with, to your point, a strong culture. And that culture can take place and be shaped in many different ways. There isn't a right or wrong culture. However, what's really important is that you signal your culture and you live by your culture so that you create transparency and consistency so that people can opt in or opt out. And that in today's world where intrinsic motivation drives human performance far more than it ever did in the industrial era, where I can count the amount of widgets you're making on the assembly line. Now I have to trust as a graphic designer that you're giving me 40 hours of work. And yes, I could put a camera on your phone and make and force it to watch you and make you check your keystrokes. But again, I think we would just create incentive to game systems, not actually drive better output. What we need to do is, to your point, unpack the human condition and human performance, understanding that each of us within ourselves can derive performance, and we have to have incentives to do so. And incentives might look like treating me with respect, providing me with opportunities for growth and development, or in your case, the opportunity part of a high profile project where you benefit from your collective peer expertise and get an opportunity to shape the path of an organization going forward. I don't think it's coincidental that an organization that has externally branded itself as a disruptive force is so comfortable disrupting itself internally. I think it would be a little bit of doublespeak if you guys were rigid inside. You wouldn't be the first, by the way, but it would be harder to reconcile. Um, but I love the way that the organization looks at it and the way you brought it to life. Clearly, they thought a lot of what you did because your next stop was the president of Adidas Canada. So here you are in an HR role, helping design the company's 5-year vision. And then the next role you have is to lead one of their operating units in a developed country, high profile market, back in Toronto. I'd like to know a bit about the process to make that transition. What was that process like in terms of making that decision, and what were those first few weeks and months looked like as you made the jump from senior HR executive into CEO of a business unit?
Yeah, when I first had that discussion with Casper, it was more about, Canada is a big enough market for us where you can do some meaningful work. It's a market that I've grown up in, I understand, and have a lot of passion for. But it's small enough that we could actually experiment and innovate. So thinking of Canada or Canadian market as sort of an incubation lab,
Hmm.
trying new things, failing fast, and then exporting it to all the 55 countries we operate in where it makes sense. And that really resonated with me because at the core, I'm a disruptor and an innovator. I appreciated the trust that he and the board had in me in taking that role. But at the same time, once you accept it and then realize what you accepted, it's a real humbling experience. And that imposter syndrome creeps up real quick
Hmm.
because here I am, I'm going to have to go out of HR, go to a very large team. We had nearly 1,900 people, and be their leader. And so, what do I know about sales, and what do I know that's going to help them accelerate the market? And for me, there was a further handicap. I'm a relationship builder at core. But the handicap for me was I moved in January, and for the next 6 months, we were still in virtual environment.
Hmm.
There were office closures, all our stores were closed. And so how do I make impact?
Hmm.
So it was long days of Teams and Zooms and Hangouts and all kinds of virtual conversations. But I started off with what I know best, which is connecting with people one-on-one, as many as that I could. I had listening sessions. I spent a lot of time with each of my leadership team members and understanding where they want to take the market. What are some ideas that they've been thinking about? What's not available to them that would help them accelerate? And that helped me then sort of calibrate what is the value add that I'm going to bring, and what am I going to have to be vulnerable about that I don't know? And that's an uncomfortable position to be in as a new leader. But I found that that level of vulnerability created a lot of currency for me. People stepped up and said, "Hey, don't worry if you don't know wholesale channels. Hey, don't worry if you don't know e-com. I got you."
Hmm.
And that created a better team. We leaned on each other, and I was able to share with them what I'm going to do, which is give them some psychological safety to be innovative, take risks. If you don't take risks, you're not going to innovate, and that there's no issue if we don't surprise each other, and that I've got your back. Something as simple as that creates an opportunity for people to be more creative. Um, I had relationships, obviously, from my time in Germany, so I could call up, phone a friend, whether it's the head of a product or a different market, and we trade resources and best practices within the company. So that was a big value add because we were able to get things rolling a bit quicker. So then the first 90 days, and I would advise anybody this is talk less, listen more, listen very attentively, and it's amazing what you can pick up. Be vulnerable, be authentic, um, and share what the win-win opportunity might be with what you bring to the table and what they bring to the table. It's got to be a win-win.
As an HR leader, I can pick through that and figure out for me where the difference is between you and most leaders and why it was the right decision to put you into the role at CEO in Data Canada, because you didn't attach yourself to the outcome. It wasn't about you and your performance. It was about empowering other people to realize their best performance. And the collective value of that was far greater than you could possibly do if you tried to drag the company into some imagined future that you thought it could be. And it would have been very easy for you to take a role and go, I'm now the CEO. I've earned this opportunity. I've got here based on merit because I have good ideas and I have good vision. So let me put this vision into place. And the people that are here can fall in behind and we can do this journey together. But what you did was the opposite. To your point, there was humility, there was consultation, there was a sense of real camaraderie where people were invested in each other's success. And that's a really hard thing to do as a leader, especially to your point when you're new in role, when you want to assure success and then turning over trust to other people that you don't know is a really terrifying thing to do. So kudos for that. And I'm sure that's accelerated your team's trust in you as you went through that process. I'm curious. It's a side question that I really hadn't planned to ask, but you're going through a tough time of transformation. You're trying to establish yourself. You're trying to recognize good performance and, to your point, create psychological safety for people to fail fast. How do you think about reward and recognition in that environment? Because it's not about a 5-year service pin and a $500 gift card for hitting the top sales target. Like, I get the sense with you, it's a lot more nuanced and layered. So I would love to understand just how do you think about performance, incentive, reward in the context of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so on the pure traditional reward side, I'm a big proponent of pay for performance
Mhm.
and differentiating significantly, so that you drive, if someone is motivated by extrinsic awards, whether it's cash or equity, et cetera, that you create an opportunity for that to happen, but very, very much linked to a meritocratic model.
Sure.
But what I found as actually, I mean, we're not a not-for-profit, so people are not there to not have an earnout. But what I find is, particularly of high performance teams, is that they're more after impact, growth, mentorship, innovation, the factors that will help them grow and create a legacy. And so that is available to us as leaders free of charge. And that should be an endless opportunity. So I always say to people, sure, you have your role, and it's important to deliver on your role, but give yourself some license to find white space around that role where you can make your mark. And for my leadership team, I always say to them, 70% of your role is your domain expertise. So if I had someone, the CFO, or if I had the head of ecom, 70% of your role is to do that. 30% of your role is to actually work together as a team to run the company.
Hmm.
And that liberates people to be more cross-functional and not just worry about their swim lanes, but also if they see someone else drowning in a different swim lane, they should be able to work with them. And also, it accelerates growth and a sense of community. So I found that people really gravitate to those type of rewards more so than cash.
I think you're right. And I think the scorecard of what's valued today is much different. We're entering into a space where time is becoming the most precious asset, and people are talking about whether they have to commute to and from work as a real deciding factor that would be weighed against salary increases or earning potential. People are prioritizing time with their families in ways that perhaps they didn't before. I grew up in an era, I'm sure you did as well, where it was very common that executives would work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And if they didn't, it was seen as you're not fully committed to the job. And now I think when I talk to executives, the ones who still do that are a little bit out of touch with the context of time, where I'm hearing more people say, I'm taking the weekend to spend time with my kids. It's
Yeah.
important for me that I spend time with my spouse during our anniversary. It's a give and take that was traditionally one directional that's now becoming bi-directional.
Well, and I mean, it's led to so much burnout. The
Hmm.
last 3 years, I think, have been the toughest to be a leader.
Hmm.
Uh, the pandemic, social unrest, and if you're in the industry where you're moving stuff around the world, supply chain disruption, there's been no shortage of crisis. And so the burnout factor is real. Mental health issues have increased significantly. And so if you don't get ahead of that and or role model for your team, I think it creates big issues, big consequences for your organization. You can't just focus on the performance. You have to focus on the health of the organization. Otherwise, it's going to creep up.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's fast forward because in amongst the very interesting career path we've already talked about, you made another interesting decision. You went and made the switch from Adidas to another iconic brand in the wellness space, Equinox, and took on the role of chief people and talent officer in that organization. I'm curious about your motivation for making the switch. You're the CEO of an iconic brand, and now you make a switch to go back into a functional area of HR. What drew you to that opportunity? What was it about that place, that time, that role that made sense for you?
Yeah, what's interesting, Matt, is I often get that question. You broke out of HR, you crossed over, you achieved a P&L. Why did
Mhm.
you leave it? And it's almost as it sounds punitive to go back to HR, but in reality, for me, um, and maybe it's FOMO. I do get caught up in FOMO now and then, but everything that is happening in the world is around the people space.
Totally
The
agree.
war for talent is still there. We're redesigning operating models with digitization. We are thinking about greater globalization. As I mentioned earlier, gig economy is only percolating, and people have high side hustles. And so, how does that factor in? Um, we're borderless in a sense, so that has consequences. I mean, social justice, there's so much more to do there. So there's no shortage of work in the people space. So the way that I see it is that my passion is in making sure organizations and people are working at their most optimal levels. I've had a tour of duty now running a large P&L. I ran a dating app for a while. That's a different story, a different hour. Um, how do I take all that and then combine it with my people lens and be a more effective CHRO? That has to be coupled with an organization that wants that.
Mhm.
And so I was very deliberate about partnering with a CEO in a company where people is their number one opportunity and issue. And I like brand-led companies that have a strong consumer experience that's informed by an employee experience. But also, partly because of my time at Adidas, but also I got so much more into mental health because I worked with a lot of athletes when I
Mhm.
was at Adidas. And the red thread that I didn't know existed was how much mental health crisis there is, even among some of the most successful athletes that are out there. And so I connected the dots between fitness and wellness, the buoyancy in that market because there's a huge opportunity in this industry, but also the impact it creates, the sort of sense of purpose that you get from fitness and wellness, that it can actually be the antidote for all that we're seeing around mental health. And I'm personally a benefactor of that. I admit I was burnt out over the last 3 or 4 years, but my solace was actually I work out every day, and it's the first thing I do at 5 in the morning. I'm one of the crazies that's there at the club at 5 a.m. But if I don't do it, I'm a different person in the day, and my team will tell me.
Mhm.
So that's what attracted me here, and it's such a passionate group of people here. Um, Lots of energy.
I can see that. And it shows that way when you go to the facilities. So, folks who haven't been to one of your facilities, it is a completely different experience than going to the gym in the most, iconic way. And it's an organization that clearly understands wellness across multiple levels and works really hard to create safety and security and for the members through that process. I, as I think about what you've just said and the comments, I think about the natural migration of our profession, in this case HR, from human resourcing to human performance. And that's what you're
Hmm.
talking about. Before it was because of, and you mentioned this quite rightly, demographics in 1960 were such that there were so many baby boomers entering into the workplace that they were fighting for jobs. And that's why in the US, Canada, people were moving all over the country trying to find an opportunity for their family, trying to create that American dream. And in a lot of cases, they found that dream. And then as demographics have changed to we entering a phase where today there are more people leaving the workplace than joining it. And that will be the case for the next 15 years, demographically speaking, even with immigration and even with thoughtfulness around skills transfers and early retirement programs and things like that. But to your point, we're going to have to augment our talent streams through a combination of technology, gig, contract, freelance, bringing people back who are previous employees on consulting assignments. Like we're going to have to be thinking about projects and work differently than the traditional, I have 18 FTE. I'm going to apply for having 19 FTE next year to get that much more work done, which is the way that you and I both grew up in HR. It was resourcing. Now it's about performance. How can you get the most out of your people by treating them the right way so they again give you that intrinsic motivation and therefore that discretionary effort. And that takes you from 65% and I don't really care and I'm punching the clock to 85% and I'm giving you that extra value, that extra passion that makes a difference and shows up, to your point, in the brand and ultimately in the customer experience, because your customers would know very, very quickly if the culture started to change. It would reflect that way in the service, the interactions with the people in the business, and just how the brand showed up. So I think you've made that switch, your organization's made that switch, and it'll be really exciting to track your progress because you're at the leading edge of thinking about this. And I'll be curious to see how things go in the coming weeks and months. It was such a great time chatting with you. I so enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Me too. It's always great to speak to someone like-minded who's sharing in the disruption and how we're evolving as a society, but how companies can and also have a positive impact in society. So thank you for the opportunity.
No, pleasure was mine. I'm going to link all your details in the podcast show notes, including details for Equinox. Folks, this is something worth checking out. So please do, and we'll be in touch next time. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
2, 3.